Assalamu alaikum. So this is going to be a lecture or an analysis of the case study by Stanford Graduate Business School, which is called Transforming HRIS at Novartis. Now, the first thing that we need to understand is that this case is not really a case study as much as it's a narrative. It's actually explaining what happened then and how they did it. So I'll try and talk about the more important aspects of it. I'm not going to go into the details. So it's just a narration or a description of how they did it and what they did. So since the merger of these two companies and the Swiss healthcare pharmaceutical company of Novartis was actually created, and the CEO Dan Vesely had begun to transform from a slow-moving functional silos, or a company that was actually working in different directions, every department was working separately, into an integrated system, or in a system that would have all the processes integrated, more specifically the HR element of it. So by 2003, the HR organization and its people had made significant progress towards the goal of becoming a premier talent machine by 2005. So they wanted to become the premier, big shot, amazing HR company, and for that, obviously, they prioritized in 2003 to create a company-wide HRIS system, or a human resource information system. So they would convert many of the transaction-based HR process. Now, in HR, there are three levels of processes. There are what is referred to as transactional processes. There are transactional processes, and there are transactional. Then there are traditional, and then there are transformational process, which are like the strategic level thing. So they wanted to make sure that all the transaction level processes that are the basics would become completely automated. So they started with an HRIS project based on that, and that's what it's about. So I'll skip the entire Novartis background because we don't really need to talk about that. Let's move to the Novartis HR organization. Let's talk about that. So the HR function that Novartis had over 700 associates that were spread across their pharma, their consumer health, the Novartis Institute for Biomedical Research, and they were also spread out different countries and throughout various regions. So since the early days of their merger of these two companies that became Novartis later on, a number of HR programs had already been in process. They were already working on them, and they are. So they include a high performance management system. So they had, which was based on the General Electric's pay per performance model, which combined a process of having the objectives being set annually, and then performance reviews being taken of their employees, and this is how they were doing it. So at the beginning of the year, managers and associates would sit down, they would determine the performance objectives that they would have, which would be smart based, and then ongoing feedback was taken, but actually it was taken only once in the middle of the year, and then a formal review would take place at the end of the year. This is how they did it. This was known as their high performance management system, inspired from the General Electric system. The second HR related program that they had was organization and talent review. This was a worldwide approach and methodology for identifying different talent that they had within their organization, and then to identify who needs what training, so that they could then be given different projects and different work. So it explained the annual OTR process in the manner that it was all about leadership standards. They said it consisted of 8 standards that made a successful, powerful, good leader, and they would then train their employees to reach those 8 levels and become important members of their organizations. Line managers were required to rate their associates in different categories of high potential, promotable, high professional, or essential contributor, so as to identify what other learnings they needed. So the OTR process was considered by senior management to be a very important part of how Novartis became a world-class company and would want to remain that way. So success in this business did not just happen. They worked very hard at it, at this whole performance management system and this OTR system that they had. Then third, they had this fast action for results program, which was also modeled after GE's program, specifically the GE's workout program. The FAR projects were actually designed to rapidly address different issues identified by a management sponsor, which meant by one of the people of the top management. So it consisted of 2-day workshops where that culminated into agreements on actions that were supposed to be implemented in 90 days. So different things were discussed. For instance, one of the FAR sessions was about animal health unit, which would prioritize that research and development would focus on these areas. So this was also another part of their HR programs. Another one which was very important to them was the Novartis learning programs, which covered all the levels of managers within Novartis, and they were dedicated to creating managers' talents and to inspiring them to grow and to contribute to the company itself. So there were 10 distinct programs related to marketing excellence program, marketing awareness programs, project management, curriculum, several others. course, and they were all offered throughout the program, and people within the organization would go and learn these courses. It was like a learning organization in the sense that they would have these training programs, these diplomas, or rather certification courses within the organization created for their own employees. Other programs included recruiting of MBAs and share options for different associates, which means they're executives, mentoring new associates, and that also contributed to Novartis's HR. These initiatives actually shows that Novartis was a very strategic and future-looking company, and they were focusing on those priorities. They were very focused on the talent acquisition management. They were very focused on how to engage their associates and to align them with the organization's capabilities, and to make sure that they were properly compensated and were given adequate trainings and were given career paths. So the company was very focused on creating a global HR system that would keep all these objectives in mind. Now let's look at the Novartis HRIS itself. So from one perspective, the HRIS was actually an IT project. It was designed to actually standardize the entire organization's HR processes, so that all the HR data could be brought together under a single umbrella, under a single database. And at the same time, the long-term goal was to make sure that the employees would be able to update their own information on a regular basis through the web, that would allow them to access this HRIS system, and the managers would be able to get global reports about all of the HR activities throughout the organization in an aggregated format without having to deal with it separately. The aim was for this global HRIS to cover all geographical regions and all business units and all global functions. And another advantage that you would get out of this would be that the HR staff would be free to concentrate on more strategic activities. That's what I said in the beginning, that the implementation of an HRIS is designed to rid the employees of any transactional and traditional activities and focus more on the strategic ones. So let's look at Novartis' HRIS now. From one perspective, this, as I said, the HRIS is supposed to actually bring in a major change by focusing more on the strategic activities. These companies which implement HRIS are looking to improve the entire HR function within their organization. They're trying to improve job satisfaction, job enrichment, and actually make their employees happier, because if they're going to focus on the strategic elements, that's bound to happen. So aside from being a major IT project, this is what HRIS did. This is exactly what it was trying to achieve, and it was part of Novartis' long-term strategy for improving their HR. So in more technical terms, this is what they were trying to do. In the more technical terms, the global HRIS would actually involve the rolling out of different key components. For instance, it would have the supporting content, which is the delivery of content at the point where it is required. In other words, people will now be able to access what they need through the HRIS system wherever they are, because the HRIS is going to be web-based. It will be focusing, connecting itself to SAP R3, which is their core transaction processing system. The SAP Business Warehouse, which will also be something that is necessary for them to get reporting and to use the data analysis for forecasting. That will connect to the HRIS system, because the look and feel would be the same for those reports as well as those for the HRIS. So the HRIS has to connect with that system too, to get reports about the HR data and about forecasting related to HR data. Plus the enterprise HR portal solution. This will integrate information and applications and as well for providing personalization of data and to actually give access to each department and to each site to that HR portal. Web enabling, and obviously which would allow employees to have the access to their own HRIS portals directly from any device, from any part of the world. So these were significant challenges for the system, and these things that they were trying to do would have been very challenging. There was a lot of challenge for system implementation. So the key to success for the global HRIS lay in the organization's ability to accept this new way of doing things. They had to learn and accept that this was going to be different from the way they were already doing things. So Novartis, they had to learn about several things. They had to learn and understand about Novartis itself, the electronic HR system. They had to do change management, they had to do system implementation and understand SAP. So their expertise would pave the way into this change. Their team had all these expertise, but they had to do all this. So why HRIS? The whole point of a global HRIS is because it has four main objectives: to implement world-class HR and processes and systems, to provide HR data in an accurate, timely way globally, to speed up the HR decision-making process, and to reduce the costs of HR operations, and to upgrade the performance of the ones that are working. So the logic actually behind this HRIS project was pretty straightforward. In this competitive world, you had to have particularly in the pharmaceutical industry, you had to be able to make quick decisions, critical quick decisions, and for that you needed data. You needed that data available to you straight away. Identifying the right talent, the right kind of people for the right kind of task was essential. So you needed that. In order to achieve these goals, the HR function needed to provide all of this data accurately and timely. For instance, if a key executive in generics left suddenly and you needed a successor, you needed to know who had the same kind of skills to be a good successor. If you needed to create a new department or start a new project or start a new work, you needed to know who the people were who would have that kind of skills to start it or to be sent there. And you needed to know that earlier on. You needed to know that years before, so that you could start preparing their career. You could start giving them the right kind of trainings to prepare them for that position. Unfortunately, the current existing IT systems were not up to these tasks, because there were 140 countries where Novartis had their departments that were completely isolated, and they were all separate. They were all working on their own. They were not centralized, they were not standardized, and the HR data was all over the place. So the survey of the existing HR system revealed that the company had these problems. There were no consistent standards. The processes and the data and the kind of data and the way the data was kept was all haphazard. There was no single consolidated database. That does not mean in one place, that means an integrated database. There was no ability to provide data in a format that would have a matrix structure, that would correlate things, that would help you understand the meaning or relationship of different variables. Plus, there was a difficulty in supporting various other businesses in identifying and moving and tracking of talent from one department to another. There were multiple fragmented systems. There were some older systems were working on PeopleSoft, which had not at that point in time being acquired by Oracle, and SAP and other softwares. So there was a lot of disintegration in the system. Plus, there was an exposure to many small vendors who created their smaller applications, so that caused a lot of compatibility issues. There was a lot of exposure to many different regulatory requirements, and therefore lack of compliance on different elements. So since there were so many countries where they had their offices, the compliance requirements were much more complex, because each country had their own requirements. Many of the existing HR systems had been developed to support different individual business units which operated in different countries, and therefore they had different ways of doing things. As a result, all of these systems were disparate. They were all separate. So the new HRIS was supposed to solve this problem by making sure that they catered for the specific requirements, the legal requirements of those places, while making sure that the functionality was the same, and allowed the HR managers and professionals to respond accordingly. So they needed to do these things. They had to support the OTR that I talked about earlier in a timely, valid way, so as to help them do the talent reviews. The global HRIS would be able to do that. They would collect the talent details of every single individual across all of the 140 countries and all of the business units, and provide it to you so that you could do your reviews. It would enable globalization by making sure that there were global data definitions and common factors that were throughout, and all of this would be accessible through the HR's web portal. The global HRIS would enable this global data sharing. It would support the growth and organizational change by making sure that all the global HR processes are the same, that there's a common technical platform and everybody has the same standards, the same material, the same data available, the reporting relationship are standardized, the job position, the job descriptions are all the same. There is no reinvention. In other words, whenever they would start a new department or a new function, or even open up a new site, it would be very easy to do, because all of that would be the same. It was all standardized. It was also meant to increase the operational efficiency by making sure that all of these global processes are integrated, so that there is lesser time wasted in just updating information. So what was the plan? So the plan for the implementation was thus. It was a plan to be a 2.5-year global HRIS project, and would be done in phases beginning in the third quarter of 2003, which was mentioned in Exhibit 6. You can look at that. So they did it, and the initial project started, pilot project started in the UK in 2004, followed by a full implementation in North America and Switzerland, and so on and so forth to other parts of the world. So the HRIS implementation was how was it done? So the first thing that they did was, they weren't the first one to do this kind of transformation. Others had done it. So they learned from others. Now SAP, which was the system Novartis actually chose, already knew how to do these things. That company was old. We've already talked about it in other cases. They are the world leaders when it comes to ERPs, and this HRIS is one module of their gigantic ERP system. So it was they had already implemented it in several places, which are listed here. So they did it in a data security company, they did it for Swiss Post, they did it for Schlumberger Limited, which was again a major big company, where they did it for their web-enabled career center. They also did it for Saudi Aramco. Saudi Aramco is one of the top 5 billionaire, billion dollar companies in the world right now. I think it's on the second or third. So these success stories actually solidified the fact that SAP HR was the right software and the company was the right one to work with, and they knew what they were doing. So they also had some issues. I mean, when questioned, the participants involved in HRIS efforts offered a lot of ideas about the success stories of how SAP HR actually helped them. So multinational food companies said that it helped them with their entire business, and several others. So people knew how this was going to be. They knew that it would get implemented. The next part of the plan involved rolling out to more countries and an enhancement of the capabilities of the new process. The project team knew that they had several challenges to handle, which were people with a global agenda. They were such as the corporate functions or system designers needed to identify the best practices and standardize them throughout all of their countries. They had to find solution that could be used across the country. However, local units had their own ways of doing things, so they had to cater for both. They had to come up with the new ways and still handle the fact that they have to standardize. So standardize most things, but still localize their solutions where necessary. So in the face of this opposition that project team would felt, they had to convince people who were naysayers, who did not want this new system. They had to manage those conflicts. It was also important for the project team not to lose momentum trying to determine every country and every region. They had to, where things will not be changed, they had to do it really quickly. I mean, if you slow down, it just doesn't get implemented. So they had to keep on rolling, keep on making it happen. This process must end, this as is thing where things are going to remain the same. No, we have to bring it to the global level. We have to standardize. That's what they had to do. So to make this process work required constant communication and explicitly sharing of assumptions and details and everything. So they had to constantly communicate with all the branches and everywhere. So while engaged in a global implementation effort, it is very crucial to pay close attention to different cultural differences, because in different countries different things would work. The way that you communicate in one country would be different from others. So they had to manage that diversity as well. So they signed a multi-million dollar contract with an HR business process management company which helped them do this. And in order to build the awareness, the company created global visibility for the employee and manager self-service portal. So they handled them. This company worked with them to create this entire HRIS. As they basically got them on board as a consultant. So another example was that they did really well was the online career development tool. This allowed employees to create their resume type profiles and to subscribe to a service that would send them bi-weekly notifications about different job postings that match the person. So there were several. These are some examples. These are basically some examples of how different companies use their HRISs. Anyways, so this is how they do it. So however, in spite of these early successes, the company decided to halt the implementation 2 years into the rollout, despite all of these advantages that they talked about. This was because of several difficulties that happened, including the acquisition of a larger company, and because of which there was a lot of complication with a lot of privacy laws in Germany, which is why they stopped the implementation after just doing it in 2 countries. So people involved in the project were convinced of the benefits because of a simplification and cost saving and everything, but still it stopped. So specifically when asked for lessons learned, the project leaders said these were the reason. This is what they learned. In spite of having received initial support from HR and line managers, and in spite of early successes, the actual implementation still showed that there was a lot of resistance. There was a lot of people who did not want this new system. Project leaders reinforced the need to simplify and standardize processes as much as possible to make before the rollout, to make it easier to implement things, right? So, and in terms of internal marketing, the message of to the organization should be to under promise and over deliver, right? Which means that always make sure that you don't say that SRIs will solve all your problems. Just say it'll solve some of the problems, and when it does more, it's always a good thing. So because if you don't give the benefits that you promised, people get really angry. So senior management in the company needs to be more committed about this than just giving the money and throwing it and walking it away. We've already talked about it in other ERP implementation cases. It is very important for the senior leadership to be fully committed, not just with money, but with every support that they can give. And when designing the system, the advice is to stay focused on the features that add value and don't do what is known as scope creep. Do not add unnecessary things. You should not web enable bad processes. Get rid of them. This is an excellent opportunity to just retain the good processes and throw the rest away. Do a BPR while you're at it. So be aware that it is easy to lose momentum when you're doing a long-term process, because people get bored, they just give up, because the deliverables take too much time. But it is important to keep an eye on the metrics, to keep on doing as much as you can, as fast as you can. End users must be involved. It's very important to make them feel like they own the system. If they don't feel that, they will give up. You need to keep focusing on the fact that they feel that they're part of the system, that they are contributing to what is being implemented. So the implications of HRIS for Novartis, when talking to others who had implemented global HRIS system, it was clear that the HR management team, that the implementation would be a long and a very difficult and painful process, but the HRIS project would be a major transformation for how they will do it. So they knew that, they understood that. Walker's successor, this new fellow Geiger, was also aware that the HRIS system was only the technical infrastructure to enable HR transformation. Just removing the administrative burdens from HR would not be sufficient to make them good business partners with their line partner. In order for that to happen, there needed to be a shift from the functional expert mindset of an HR to a more strategic aspect. So just bringing in the software won't solve it. People will need to change their mindsets. Interviews with line managers also underscored another challenge of the changing role of basic HR. On one side, the business unit head acknowledged that his global HR associate was already a strategic business partner, because they were now realizing how they could take strategically. But at the same time, the business head also commented that at the moment HR is not strategic or operationally robust. They're just taking care of the policies and procedures. They're not looking at the talent management. They're not looking at it strategically. Yes, they are getting rid of the nonsensical work, but they're still not just there. So as the HR management team thought about the rollout of the global HRIs, they wondered whether the organization was up to the challenge. But it did. So the HRIS system freed up a lot of the extra time that was wasted of the HR managers doing these menial tasks, giving out accepting applications, handling the leave applications, going through the CVs and resumes, and planning meetings, and deciding on what training programs to give, all sorts of things, and managing the compensation and giving out checks and payments, payroll management, which is all pointless. All of that is handled by the HRIS system. So there were many things they could do in that time. They could do strategic management. They could plan for the future, strategic talent management. They could do global HR management. So they could work on so many things. Now, there are several HRIS systems that do this. The one that was talked about in this case is, of course, SAP. In the other course that I teach, which is HRIS, there are several other open source HRIS that you can look at. For instance, there is one called Orange HRM. There's another called Centrifugo, another called ICE HRM, and another one called Web HR. These are some examples of really good HRIS systems which are freely available. Some of them are open source. You could implement them, which let you get rid yourself from these menial tasks. That's essentially what an HRIS is all about. Hope this helps you understand this case. Thank you.